We're all done here. You guys want to see? Deep Red's all done. What a journey it's been. Actually, it's taken a little bit longer than I had hoped, but there were a couple other projects that came up. Releases following Computex, such as the NVIDIA graphics cards, the AMD graphics cards, the new motherboard I got, a couple of cases that came in, a couple of client projects that came in. All this has been really distracting and things that I've kind of had to put ahead of rebuilding my main rig, but it is done. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of run down quickly some design choices I made when rebuilding the loop, and then kind of go over the benchmarks, how the system's performing. So initially, when I built this loop, when it had the 5820K in it, I did so by bending tubes and using all EK fittings. I'm a big proponent of EK parts, especially their water blocks and radiators. But honestly, when it comes to fittings, I've had a couple of bad experiences. They're actually the only brand of fitting that I've ever used that has ever leaked on me. Now, their customer service is great and they do a really good job of taking care of you if something like this happens. But in a system like this, I really want to try to minimize the chance that these kinds of things happen. So I decided to swap out all the fittings for Bits Power. Bits Power fittings I've had a really good track record with. I used them in my Manta build, which you can see up here. And what I decided to do instead of bending tubes was use their 90-degree multi-link adapters. This does introduce additional failure points into the system, as what leaks in a water-cooled system is not the tubing is not going to erode, but rather the leaks occur where the tubing meets the blocks, the radiators, or anything in between. And how does that happen? With fittings. So the more fittings you introduce into your system, unfortunately, the higher likelihood that you're going to encounter a leak. But I wanted to be all fancy, right? So I guess I got to take that chance. In addition to the Bits Power 90-degree multi-link adapters, I also introduced into the system a Bits Power flow indicator. This actually does absolutely nothing for the system except add some aesthetic value. It also does kind of serve as like an emergency notification if for some reason your pump stops working. But if your pump stops working, your temperatures are going to go through the roof. So I think you'd notice pretty quickly anyway. I also did relocate the drain port that I have in the system. It used to be located at the bottom of the front radiator, and it used to snake out the back of the case with a piece of black soft tubing. This was fine, it worked, but it wasn't really my favorite solution because every time I wanted to drain the system, I had to take the back panel off, I had to uncurl the tube, and then I had to make sure that there were no kinks or anything like that. This way, by putting it at the bottom of the second GTX 1080, it's a lot more easily accessible, and it allows me to attach any kind of fitting that I want to the front and then drain the system that way. I also swapped out the MSI SLI bridge for an EVGA one. I really was hoping to get an HB bridge in this system. Unfortunately, I was unable to get my hands on one at the time that I was building the system, so I just kind of let that go by the wayside. To be honest with you, HB bridges really don't do anything unless you're gaming or doing any kind of content above 4K resolution. And my monitor that I game on and that I do everything else on is 4K 60, so the regular LED EVGA bridge will actually be just fine. I also want to give a big shout out to Joe with Modders Inc. You could find a link to his website in the video description. He provided the cables for this build, and as always, he does fantastic work. Check them out if you guys need some custom cabling done. Alright, well, I think the big question on everybody's mind is how does it perform? You know, I mean, I got all this high-end hardware in there, it's water-cooled. What kind of temperatures am I getting? What kind of performance am I getting in games? Well, before we discuss the temperatures, we need to discuss the overclock that I've applied to this system. The processor I was actually able to get up stable above 4.4 gigahertz, unlike what I talked about in this video here where I reviewed the 6900K. I thought that there was actually a hard cap on this chip at 4.4, but as it turns out, it's just the multiplier that's capped at 44. I was actually able to squeeze an additional 88 megahertz out of the chip by playing with the strap. I bumped it up to 102, and by using the same 44 multiplier, I was able to get it up to 4488 instead of the flat 4400. This actually allowed me to complete almost all the benchmarks that I was running, but the heat that was being generated because I had to have the processor set at 1.4 volts was a little more than I was comfortable with, and I have since backed it off to just the flat 44 multiplier with the 100 strap. Luckily, before I backed off the overclock, I was able to break in to the top 10 of the Firestrike Ultra Hall of Fame for 2 GPU setups. I doubt that this is actually going to stand for very long as more and more people get their hands on the next gen hardware, but hey, it's pretty cool to see, I guess. As far as the 1080s, I actually was able to squeeze a little more juice out of them than I was when they were air-cooled. I got them up to plus 240 on the core and plus 450 on the memory. This, again, was generating a little more heat than I was comfortable with, although it did seem to be fairly stable. So I backed it off to plus 225 and plus 400. After I did all the overclocking, where I maxed it out and then backed it off a little bit, I've reached a very stable point. I haven't had any failures in regular applications outside of the Ashes of the Singularity benchmark, which we'll talk about in a minute. The system stays relatively cool under 100% load for both graphics card and CPU, despite the fact that there is a fairly heavy overclock going on. I'm able to maintain temperatures in the mid-50s for the CPU and for both of the GPUs. At idle, the CPU stays at about 29 degrees, and both GPUs hang out at around 23-24 degrees. Alright, so let's take a look at some benchmarking scores at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. As you guys can see, there is no lack of performance here. This is a system that hangs with the absolute best of the best. It's kind of what I was going for here. This is a showpiece, but at the same time, it is not at all necessary to build this kind of machine for regular use and for gaming. If you guys have any questions about this system or any other system, how I put it together, the components involved, or anything like that, leave a comment down below or hit me up on Twitter at BPS_customs. Get subscribed to this channel because I do have a new series coming up called The Best PC You Can Buy. You can check it out up here. The first episode is going to be coming out at the end of July, and it's going to be the price point of $1,000. If you guys want to see anything other than $1,000, I'm the guy to talk to, so let me know. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this 3-part journey into my ridiculous obsession with building water-cooled PCs. Thanks for being patient with me while I went through all these iterations of videos. I couldn't really jam it all into one because A, it would have been too long, and B, it would have taken me weeks to produce. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me through this. As always, guys, I'm Brian with BPS Customs. Stay tuned, get subscribed, hit the like button, do all kinds of crazy stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.